before I begin, let me place the link in the chat. There's that. Okay, so in case you missed something or you want to review anything, it's there in the chat. You will be able to catch up on all of our previous sessions. As I mentioned last week, I believe we've passed the 50 class mark, so it's pretty impressive and pretty exciting. So we're but besides for that, we also finished the 8th chapter last week. So we're starting this week with the 9th chapter. And if you recall, if you were here last week, and if you recall, I mentioned that I was really excited over the fact that I did not have to do, I ran out of time, and I did not have time to do the first verse of chapter 9. And the reason for that is because I was struggling to figure out exactly what it was trying to say. I was struggling with some terminology in the verse, and I spent a week on looking over it and trying to figure out what it's saying, and I'm still kind of confused about it. So I have a take on it, but I think there's still potentially room for more discussion, trying to figure out what's going on over there. So before we get into that, let's just recap what we've been discussing. Again, the second half of the book has been primarily a discussion of wisdom, as opposed to happiness. Again, the first half of the book is really more about happiness. The second half of the book is more about wisdom. Okay, obviously they both touch on each other. You know, they have discussion. Sorry, press the wrong button there. The discussion of wisdom is going to have something to do with happiness. The discussion of happiness is going to have something to do with wisdom. So there's definitely an interrelationship there. However, it's the focus of what we're talking about. And again, the focus of what we're talking about over here now has been wisdom. And there's been a lot of different discussions. And he got on this discussion last week about the way that the wise person relates to wisdom. Okay, again, the way that the wise person relates to wisdom. And he brought up this interesting idea that the wise person is so excited about new knowledge, about new information, that they basically can't hold themselves. They can't keep themselves. The way they react to it is with extreme excitement. They can't fall asleep at night because they're so excited over learning more information. And really, it's a fascinating idea that there's always more to learn. And that's what we saw the last verse, the last chapter last week we were discussing, says that there's always more to learn. You can have the smartest person in the world in one field, the world expert in one field, but that means nothing about whether or not they have knowledge about another field. And so you can spend your entire life dedicated to one project, and really there's still not enough time to go and research another project. So in that sense, the wise person is always thirsty, always interested, and making those connections and trying to find more wisdom. Okay, and then he moves into this first verse of chapter 9. Now, one of the problems that I ran into was that I wanted it to say one thing. I was hoping he was going to say a certain thing. He's going to flesh out this idea more of wisdom and just this desire to know everything and learn everything. But he didn't do that, and that's kind of where I was getting stuck. What I was finding was that the words weren't matching what I wanted the words to say, which there's two ways you could approach that problem. You could say, well, I'll make the words work, and the other approach is that you could say, practically speaking, I don't think the words are saying what I want them to say, and therefore I have to adjust what I'm thinking as opposed to what the words are saying. So that's really where I kind of had to get to. I had to get to the right headspace to figure out, to take on this new chapter and these new opening verses of this chapter. And so that's where we are now. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. And all this is in theory right now. You haven't seen the verse yet. But okay, so with that, let's jump into the share screen. We could take a look at this together. And we are here now in chapter 9. This is verse number 1. So the greater context, the larger discussion going on again, is how the wise person, the chacham, approaches chachma, how they approach wisdom. Okay? And And that leads us to this first verse over here. Let me highlight it so it's a little easier to see. And he says key, because. So usually when you have the word key, again, that means because or for or that or something to that effect. It's usually linking us back to the point before. As I mentioned previously, the chapter breakup is not from Torah. It's not from our sources. The monks, Christian Catholic monks, or Christian monks at least, I don't think there's a difference in that sense. Christian monks went ahead and made the chapter breakups. They are not from us. However, they're a useful tool, but they don't always give us a great sense of what of really where the break is supposed to be. So that key does indicate to you that this is really linked to the last thing stated. Not only that, we look at the next word. It's ki et kol zeh, all this meaning all the things we just talked about. Natati el libi, I have placed on my heart. V'lavur et kol zeh, and to clarify all this. Okay, so whatever it is that we're talking about, whether it's whatever we just spoke about or whatever we're about to speak about, and either way, both of those things, or potentially one or the other of those things, I have placed on my heart, and my intention is to clarify this. Lavur is an interesting word. You know what? Let me read the whole verse, and then I'll come back to discuss the words one by one. That's what we usually do. All right, so again, ki et kol zeh natati el libi, all of this I have placed on my heart, v'lavur et kol zeh, to clarify all of this, asher hatzadikim v'achachamim, because the righteous and the wise, va'avdehem, and it's a good question, but let's just translate it as their servants, biyad ha'elokim, are in the hands of God. Gam ahava, gam sinah, ein yodea ha'adam, also love and also hate are not known to people. Hakol lifnehem, and all of it is before them. Okay, so again, doing what he often does, he's going kind of back and forth with some phrasing. But okay, let's read that all one more time, and then we'll take it piece. Then we'll take it piece by piece. Ki et kol zeh natati el libi, all of this I have placed on my heart. V'lavur et kol zeh, and to clarify all of this, asher hatzadikim v'achachamim va'avdehem, because the righteous, the wise, and their servants, biyad ha'elokim, are in the hands of God. Gam ahava, gam sinah, ein yodea ha'adam, and both love and hatred people do not know. Hakol lifnehem, and everything is before them. Okay, that's the straight up translation of what these words mean. But obviously, there's a lot of things here we have to figure out what it's talking about. The first thing I want to point out, my lips aren't working properly tonight. The first thing I want to point out is this word vilavur. Okay, I had to do a little research to dig in whether this word has come up previously or will come up again in Kohelet, and it does not. So this is the only time in the book that he's using this terminology. I think that itself is indicative of something, and it's indicating something important to us. There's a lot of words that he will reuse, and a lot of words that he won't reuse. So this one is a word he's not reusing at any point. I don't have to match it up to any other place where he uses this phrase. So that means he's engaged in an activity that he has not done and will not do at any other point in the book. Okay, so that's an important note. We're trying something new, so to speak. And the word lavur has a couple different options. I actually gave you a translation. I said to clarify all of this. That's not really true. That's not a good translation. I know that's one of our hallmarks. We try to get the proper translation, so I gave you the wrong one. That would be livaer. We would replace the letter vav over here with an aleph. That would mean to clarify. Okay, that shows up multiple times in the Torah, particularly at the end of the Torah, where Moses is given the commandment to tell the people when they enter the land of Canaan to write the Torah on large boulders, in order so that should be ba'er hetev, very clear and understandable for people around the world. Okay, that would be ba'er. which would be related to the word also for a well, because a well should be something that's a source of knowledge. Clarification should be, or whatever, clarification should be a source like a well is. That would be the kind of an understanding of that. But that's not our word over here. Okay, so I gave you the wrong translation because it kind of fit better when I was reading the verse. But the truth of the matter is, both Rashi and the Mitsuda, those are basically our two major commentaries. They say that the word has a different shoresh, a different root in Hebrew. Now, the root there that they say is that the word is be, the letter bet, resh, and another resh afterwards, right? That's the rules of Hebrew grammar. The second resh can fall away. And really the word is barer, which is not to clarify, but is to separate, okay, to make a distinction. Like, for example, on Shabbat, we have a mitzvah, we have a commandment not to, or one of the things we're not supposed to do on Shabbat is we're not supposed to separate items, okay? So that's what we're doing over here. He's saying, I have placed on my heart to make a distinction, okay? That's not to clarify something, like I said originally, it's actually to make a distinction. Now, obviously, the way Hebrew works, those words are going to be related. There's something there, and the fact that they share so many letters, and they're almost interchangeable, so there's clearly something that we're supposed to see from that. But we're not simply saying, I want to clarify. He's not saying I want to clarify the role of the righteous and the wise. Rather, what he's saying is, I want to separate, I want to make distinct the righteous and the wise and their servants. So to make them distinct from, well, at first, and this is where I got stuck last week, I thought he wanted to make them distinct from each other, okay? He wanted to distinguish righteous and wise people. After looking at it and looking at the context of the verses around, I do not believe that's what he's doing. Rather, what he's doing is he's saying that there's something distinct about righteous and wise and their servants on one side, and fill in the blank on the other side. And that fill in the blank is going to be obviously the non-righteous, non-wise people, and in fact, people who are not connected to the righteous and the wise either. Okay, so he's going to be making a distinction, not just in the way, again, we've been discussing how the wise person approaches wisdom, but there's something more to it than that. There's approaching wisdom and the way that it's distinct from how other people approach wisdom. It's distinct from how other people look at the conditions of this world and how they will explain it or complain about it, or that's basically what we're going to see. Is it's a distinction in how they go about making sense of the unsensible, the things that don't make sense to your average person. Okay, so that's a very important thing. When we changed that word from clarify to distinguish, something important happened there. We now identified, or we hinted to, or indicated a second group. So there's group A that we're going to discuss right here, and group B that's actually going to be the subject of the coming verses. Okay? All right, so let's look at this group A first a little bit and try to understand who they are. He gives us three identifiers. Asher hatzadikim v'achachamim va'avodehem. Okay, so at first I would say that these are pretty simple terms. You have tzadikim, that's the righteous. And chachamim, those are the wise. So those are pretty basic terms. These are terms that we use all the time in our own conversation. You say so and so is a tzaddik, so and so is a righteous person, or so and so is a chacham, a wise person. An interesting thing is that these are not interchangeable. They're not the same thing at all. In fact, they're, I wouldn't say opposites, but they do the exact opposite things. Okay. For example, if somebody is smart, does that necessarily mean that they're righteous? No, in no way, shape, or form. Some of the greatest, some of the most wicked people were very smart people. Okay. So just being wise has nothing to do with your actions. Wisdom is separate from action. At the same time, action is also separate from wisdom. People who act properly are not necessarily wise people. Okay, so to take an example, there are many people who are just good people, right? They act well, they do the right thing, they never get in trouble, they keep their noses clean, so to speak, and that says nothing about their wisdom per se. What it does say is that they are righteous, they are good people. So you have over here on one side the good people, and on the other side the wise people. I would think that those would be two separate groups, which is why which they are two separate groups. But I would think to not connect those, which was why when I first looked at this verse over the past couple of weeks, I thought he was saying, sorry, that he's going to distinguish between those two groups. But he doesn't do that. And again, that's not what we're going to see in the coming verses. What we find is that he's actually lumping these together. Okay? So there's tzaddikim, the righteous people, who again says nothing about their wisdom. You have the wise people, who again that says nothing about their actions. Their actions may be wanting. There's the same thing with the righteous. The righteous people may be not so bright. It's possible. It's an interesting thing, just as a total side point, not connected to the verse over here, is that there's in the Passover Seder, we have the idea of the four sons that are mentioned in the Torah. Four times that the Torah goes ahead and in relationship to talking about the actions that a person does, of telling the story of the Passover Exodus on the night of the 15th of Nisan, the night of Passover. There are four different places. It's actually three, but we look at it as four different places where the Torah mentions children in that process. And we understand that there's four sons, basically four children, four types of learners who are involved in that process. We say there's the wise son, the wicked son, the simple son, and the son who knows nothing, who does not know how to ask. Okay? And in our minds, it's often understood that the wise son, he's the nemesis of the wicked son. Okay, the two of them, they butt heads, and then you got the other two who are kind of in their own category. They don't know how to engage, so you engage with them. Okay, there's a number of commentaries among them, the Vilna Gaon, who say no, you got the order mixed up, so to speak. The wise son is not necessarily a good son. The wise son could be the wicked son. They could be interchangeable. The opposite of the wise son is the one who does not know how to ask questions. The wise person is, as we've seen over here, wise person is constantly searching for reason, searching for meaning, as opposed to somebody who does not know how to ask. That's the opposite of wisdom. And simple is the opposite of wicked. That's how, again, the Vilna Gaon looks at it, that simplicity is a trait of the righteous, as opposed to wickedness, which again, the wicked son can be the wise son too. In fact, they are the ones, if I remember correctly, they have some overlapping verses in the Torah. So just because somebody is wise does not mean that they are not wicked or that they are wicked. It's totally divorced from the entire concept. Action and wisdom are two separate considerations. Okay, so then he throws in one last thing. This is where I really got thrown off, is va'avadehem. Okay, now I translated it. Once again, when we first looked at the verse, I translated va'avadehem as their servants. That is the take of Rashi. And that is, I think, as far as I'm concerned, that is the correct or the most fitting understanding of the word. There is another understanding that Suda learns that avadehem is referring to their actions. Avad means to serve. So is it those who serve them, meaning the righteous and the smart, or is it their service? Okay, the wise and the righteous. Okay, either one of them is plausible. I think in the general context, it makes a little more sense to understand that we are talking about not their actions, but rather those who are in cahoots with them, those who serve the righteous and the wise, which is in and of itself a tremendous idea. That means whatever it is that we're about to say, the distinction between righteous and wise people versus everybody else, well, you have a way in to getting their advantage. Whatever their advantage is, you have a way in, even if you're not necessarily part of either of those groups, but there's a way to connect with that, and that is through service, through acts of service with those groups, to hang out around the righteous, or to hang out around the wise, has its own effect. That's a tremendous idea that Rashi is alluding to. and it's novel, really. That means if a person, he's suggesting basically that if a person spends enough time amongst the righteous, you'll have some sort of insight that other people don't have. If you spend time amongst the wise, even if you're not necessarily wise yourself, you'll merit some sort of insight that other people don't have. So that's a tremendous idea, and that's the first time we're seeing that over here in this book. He's been talking about the wise person. This is the first time we see him. First of all, it's the first time we see him making a connection between the righteous and the wise, and the first time that also that we see somebody who's not necessarily wise but can latch on to the group and you know make that connection themselves, even though they are not inherently wise or righteous themselves. Okay, and what is this? What are the what is it that these groups share with each other? Again, righteous and wise people don't share a lot of things in common. One is theory and one is action, so to speak. They don't necessarily share anything with each other, but they share something because we're grouping them together. So number one is that they share Biyad HaElokim. They both have something. They are in the hands of God. Okay, that's also a pretty large statement that King Solomon is telling us over here. I understand that the righteous people are in the hands of God, but I wouldn't necessarily have made that jump to say that wise people are in the hands of God. What does it mean to be in the hands of God? I don't know yet. Okay, we haven't looked into that idea, but there's something godly about a wise person, even if the wise person is not necessarily a righteous person. I could also argue that it's a novel concept to say that a righteous person who has no wisdom, who never thinks through the things that they do, they simply do it without thought. I would not necessarily have thought that they are in the hands of God either. In God's, let's say, in God's good graces to a certain degree. So you act well because you know no better. That's not necessarily a good thing. It just means that you don't know any better. So I can make the argument that both of those are very novel concepts that we're going to call righteous people, even though they're not necessarily so smart or haven't really put in the thought to understand why they do things. We're still going to call them in the hands of God. And similarly, the wise people who may not even have good actions, we're going to call them in the hands of God. Okay. I think perhaps there's another idea over here. Again, we have not discussed what does it mean to be in the hands of God. I don't know if we're going to even discuss it, but he wants you to know that these two groups, or three groups, if you add their servants, these three groups are in the hands of God. Okay, so what does it mean that they're in the hands of God? Perhaps what it means is that there's little choice that a person can make in being these groups. A little harder to say on the righteous people, but with the wise people, wisdom is something you either have or you don't. Obviously, there's steps you could take to hone your wisdom, but you either are wiser or not. Again, to a certain extent. So I could say I could learn the words Biyad HaElokim as saying that wisdom is it's a matter of grace, of providence. You have to get it or you don't. You can't necessarily say the same thing about righteousness. Righteousness is a process the person works through. So I'm gonna freely admit that this statement Biyad HaElokim is still kind of a mystery to me. Nevertheless, we do see that he is stating that the righteous and the wise and their servants they benefit from being in the hands of God. Okay, take it or leave it. They're in the hands of God. I think you could say also, this is just on one foot I'm saying this, that they benefit from being more central to the general way things go, I guess, the way things are. The people who act well and the people who are wise will play a larger role in the big, movie of life, I guess. Maybe that's what it means that they're in the hands of God also. Your average Joe doesn't necessarily get there, doesn't necessarily become a big player on the stage, but the righteous and the wise, they do take up a much larger role. That's just something I'm thinking of. I don't have that fleshed out. But we could hypothesize all sorts of potential meanings for this. He does not flesh it out. It's almost like a statement he dropped on us. And again, as I mentioned, I don't have a great handle on what he wants us to get out from there, but it's something that these two groups share, or three groups share: the righteous, the wise, and those who are connected to those groups, right? Those who serve the righteous and those who serve the wise. Okay. And then there's another thing that we have over here, something that distinguishes them from the rest of humanity. And this one, he actually speaks out. When it comes to love and hatred, your average person does not understand love and hatred. However, hakol lifneihem, when it comes to these groups, the righteous and the wise, they do have an understanding of that. Hakol lifneihem, all these things are before them, meaning that they have a grasp on it. It's not a mystery to them. They understand love and hatred. Okay. What does that mean? What does it mean that your average person does not understand love and hatred? What does it mean that the wise and the righteous do have an understanding of love and hatred? Those are very important questions. So if my theory is correct and that this is how we're reading the verse, the next verse should go ahead and say, because love means such and such, and hatred means such and such. But actually, these words take a back seat for another 5 verses. We do not find love and hatred show up again for 5 verses. They show back up in verse number 6, chapter 9, verse number 6. That's the next time we're going to see be reintroduced to love and hate. So that's kind of a strange thing, if that's what we're talking about. We want to see what is it about love and hatred that your average person doesn't understand, and the righteous and the wise and those connected to the righteous and the wise, those people do get it. It's all in front of them. So we're going to do what King Solomon likes to do, which is that he's going to examine something from the opposite. Instead of presenting to us what it is about life that lets the wise person or the righteous person see what it means to feel love and to feel hatred, rather what he first does is he says, what does everybody else see first? Okay? And so that's going to take us to verse number 2. Okay, so again, verse number 1 has stated that we're distinguishing between group A, which is the righteous and the wise and their servants, and we're between them and group B, which is everybody else. Okay, well, he refers to simply over here as ha'adam, people. Okay, people do not understand these things. Humanity, Adam is generally a reference to society as a whole. Okay, it's humanity as opposed to this other group that we're talking about. So something that the rest of the people do not know, love and hate, group A, the righteous, the wise, and their servants, it is before them. They get access to these concepts. They know what's going on. Okay, so again, what we're going to do is in verse number 2, we're going to explore the point of view, the POV of the other people. Okay, all right, that brings us to verse number 2. I hope you can see a little bit now why verse number 1 was a little hard to figure out, because I think what we've come out with is what the verse is saying, but it's not so clearly stated in the verse. So it's with the understanding of why he picks specific words, we now get to a deeper understanding. And again, I originally thought that he was going to distinguish between the righteous and the wise. It doesn't seem to be that he's doing that. In fact, he lumps them together in a group and separates between them and everybody else. Okay, so that brings us again to verse number 2. Okay, this now is the statement of your average person. And this will continue for a number of verses. We're only going to get to this verse tonight, but we're now going to see the statement of everybody else. He did a similar thing, just if you recall, I would have to think about where this actually is, but somewhere in the first half of the book, he went through a very long, like a diatribe of what the non-happy person thinks. Okay, that seems to be what he's doing over here. I was saying, what does the non-wise, non-righteous person think when they look at the world? Okay, and he says, hakol, for everybody, kasher lakol, whatever happens to everybody, mikra echad, there is one occurrence, la tzadik v'la rasha, for both the righteous and the wicked. latov, for the good, v'latahor, and for the person who is pure, v'latamei, and for the person who is impure, v'lazoveach, to the one who sacrifices, v'lasher enenu zoveach, and for the one who does not sacrifice, literal sacrifice, meaning sacrifices. Katov kachoteh, just like the righteous, just like the good person is the sinner, hanishba kasher shavua yareh, and so too the one who swears is just like the person who is fearful of swearing. Okay? All right. So this is another one of our good challenges to figuring out how we understand Kohelet to be an empowering book. If I were to just read this verse out of context, I would say, oh, he's saying, wow, life stinks because no matter what you do, you're a good guy, you're a bad guy, you're going to have the same fate at the end of the day, which he has said in other contexts too, but with a different meaning. And it's not to say that it's a reason to be upset. It's rather a reason to be to look forward. And when you understand, looking at the verse before that, we're talking from the point of view of the everybody else. So then it makes a little more sense why he's saying this. He's not saying this. Everybody else says this. Okay. And well, that will become clear as we see the verses going on. So let's read that again. Hakol kasher lakol. That's a bit of a poetic statement right there, a phrasing right there. That everything, meaning everything, mikra echad, has one occurrence happen to them. Okay, mikra means we use it nowadays as coincidence. It's not really the meaning. It means the occurrence, whatever happens to the person. It's one thing that happens to everybody. La tzadik v'la rasha, both for the righteous and for the wicked. La tov, la tahor, la tov for the good person, v'la tahor, v'la tamei, and both for the pure and the impure. V'la zoveach, to the one who makes sacrifices, or who sacrifices to God, that's presumably. V'la sharinenu zoveach, and to the one who does not sacrifice. Katov kachoteh, just like the good, so too the one who sins. Hanishba kasher shubo yareh, and so too the one who swears also is the same thing that happens to the one who is fearful of swearing. Okay. Now this is a very interesting verse from the eyes of Chazal, the eyes of the sages, who in the Midrash they have a whole long explanation of what this verse is referring to. It says, who's the righteous person? That's referring to Noah. Okay, Noah, in Talmudic literature, it's understood that Noah was lame in one leg because he was late in feeding the lion, and the lion took a swipe at him when he was on the ark, and so he was lame, whatever. He was handicapped in some form. And similarly, the wicked person is the Pharaoh in the times of Josiah, late in the kingdom of Judah, who also was handicapped by some other story. And so one's a righteous person, one's a wicked person. And you see, they both got the same fate. They both were lame. They both were handicapped. Okay. The good person is referring to Moses. The pure person is referring to Aaron, who was one who was involved in purifying people. And the Tameh, the impure person, I believe, is referring to Korach, I believe. I think that's what it is. Yeah. And so I don't remember how that works. I'd have to look up again exactly who that's referring to. Zoveach, the one who sacrifices, is referring to the sons of Aaron who died when they tried to bring an alien fire into the Holy of Holies. And the one who does not sacrifice is referring to another group, somebody else. I don't know. Again, I would have to look up again who it's referring to. And what we have is piece after piece. We've got each person they're all related to each other. They all have similar actions. They all have similar occurrences, circumstances, although one of them is righteous and one of them is not. I'll just take a second here and look at this message here. The righteous and the wise, that righteousness and wisdom are characters that always occur together of people, whether righteousness and wisdom may occur in individuals together or separately. That's a good question. Again, I would have to spend a little more time on looking into that. again, Diane is asking the nature of the righteous and the wise as two groups of people. Are we saying that these always occur in tandem together in a revered group of people, or the righteousness and wisdom may occur in individuals together or separately? I think it's that they can occur separately. I think that's one of the points that we're trying to bring out. Personally, that's how I'm understanding it. Okay, but it's possible that there's also, he's trying to say that they do kind of rise together. I don't know. Okay, so again, looking at this verse over here, the final one I think is the final one, the one who swears, the one who's afraid of swearing. The one who swears is referring to Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, who swore to Nebuchadnezzar or something, something to that effect, and gets his eyes poked out eventually. And the one who refused to swear or was afraid of swearing is referring to Samson, who was he refused to swear to Delilah and her folks, and he also got blinded. So we see over here that it doesn't matter whether you're good or bad, you can end up with the same fate in the end of the day. Okay, that's not wrong. That is not an incorrect observation. You have two people who are who have done similar things. They've done totally different things. Their actions are completely different from each other. However, they end up with a similar fate. And you don't have to look to people in Tanakh either. Again, that's how the sages presented as people in Tanakh. However, you could look at it in our own lives. You have people who end up with similar fates, even though one's good and one's bad, right? Whatever good and bad mean, but we'll just call them good and bad. A similar kind of concept comes out. There's a story in the Talmud of a great sage by the name of Hanina ben Dosa. It was a great man and a bit of a miracle worker in the times of the sages. That's how it's brought down. And there's a whole story about how it's not, I can't go through the whole story right now, but suffice to say, where you have two people, one righteous and one not necessarily righteous, but they end up with the same fate, even though they are totally different people with different ways, one's righteous and one's not. And so what you see over here is we look at the circumstances that befall people, and your average person, again, this is what the average person says. The average person says, what's going on here? How could it be that both the righteous person and the wicked person, or fill in the blank with whatever binary you want, but how is it possible that the two sides of that binary can both end up with the same fate when they're doing totally different things? Actually, now I remember. The good is Moses, the pure is Aaron, and the impure are the spies. None of them were able to go into the land of Israel, right? The spies died right then and there, or within the next couple of days. And Moses and Aaron also, for a separate reason, were not allowed to go into the land of Israel. So, I would look at that. Your average person would look at that and say, hey, no fair. I get why the bad guys didn't get to go in the land of Israel and land of Canaan, technically. But why didn't Moses and Aaron get to go in? And now, obviously, there is another reason why they weren't allowed to go in. So one of the things that we can already see, at least from the examples that the sages are giving us, is that it lacks a certain level of perspective. You look at a situation, you say, oh, well, it's not fair because, this guy's a good guy and this guy's a bad guy. But in reality, there may be more information that's missing. I think that's a point that, although it's not spoken out over here, you could already see just from the way that the sages present the cases, present the examples, you can see that, there's something lacking in perspective that is going to guide why your average person sees it one way, and the wise or righteous person would see it a different way. Let me just state one thought over here. I find it interesting because I think the righteous person and the wise person would say totally different answers to the same question. I don't think they would give the same answer. From the righteous people that I've been around, your average righteous person is okay not is okay not having answers to questions. And they would say, the will of God, no questions. And I think the wise person would say a very different answer of, there's something here we can expect and understand, and that will also lead me to some sort of level of 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 consolation, I guess, with this matter. So that's just a side point, and perhaps something we could explore more in another case. But at least we could say that this is the statement of, we're not saying this is the statement of the righteous, the wise person. Rather, this is the statement of the other people. And we're going to see the opposite, or how does the righteous and the wise person address this in the coming verses. Okay, but first we're actually going to take a couple verses in this track of the other people. Okay. All right, that takes us back to the main screen over here. Thank you very much for joining us.